I'm Jim Collison and live from our virtual studios around the world. This is Gallup's Called the Coach, recorded on May 13th, 2021. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, we'd love to have you join us in our chat room. The link is just right above me there. Click on that. It'll take you to YouTube. Sign in with your Google account. Join us in chat. Let us know where you're listening from. That's always nice. If you're listening after the fact, and many of you do, thousands of you listen to this as a podcast or on YouTube, and you have questions, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, while you're out there, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or there on YouTube. Some of the terminology's changed now. It might be follow now. It's been subscribed forever. Apple has just changed that to follow. Whatever you have to do to get it on a regular basis, do that. And we'd appreciate you joining the community in that way. Dr. Mike McDonald is our host today. He works as a senior workplace consultant at Gallup here on the riverfront. I kind of consider him one of my best friends at work. Mike, always great to have you on Called the Coach. Welcome back.
Yeah, I love it, Jim. I volunteer to do this, but I will say in all sincere appreciation to you, and I'm right here with the rest of the audience. Like I myself, and I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people who get the chance to even be on your show. It just makes all of us so much better and so much smarter. And I don't think we can ever stop doing that. So thank you for collectively pulling all this together. Honestly,
you're welcome. Well, during the pandemic, it has increased my engagement because I get to talk with some of the best leaders in our own folks around the world every single week, and it just has given me some insight into the world of the manager, into the world of the workplace. When we think about well-being, we think about strengths and engagement. It's just kind of kept me in the center of the universe, so to speak, right? The hot spot. And it's been pretty great. Speaking of hotspots, we are in part 3 of a 4-part series, as we look at and we're kind of focusing in this world of a manager in regards to engagement. It's a follow-up to a 14-part series you and I did back, I think, 2018, where we talked about all 12 questions in the Q12 plus the way to do it through our book, First Break All the Rules. So this is a follow-up to that. Mike, bring everybody kind of up to speed. Last week, we talked kind of about the challenges. We're talking a little bit about the perks. I didn't realize there were perks for managers. So this is going to be, I thought it was all challenges, just to be 100% honest.
I know.
So, but bring folks up to speed a little bit. Where are we coming at? What data are we using? Some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's a redemptive conversation, which I think is very consistent with this audience and consistent with the philosophy of strengths, right? But we do want to make sure we started off with the first conversation really giving us kind of what's the world look like and what's the place of the manager, now as things continue to evolve and respond to disruption. Fast forward then on the other side to the biggest challenges for managers. And Jim is kind of an entry point into this conversation. You were starting to talk about well-being. That conversation is, again, very loud. I think, just to be honest, this is my opinion, not necessarily research grounded, but my opinion, I think the world in the workplace used to consider well-being as kind of a nice to have. If you have the resources, if you have the margin for it, if you have the right leadership, then sure, add it on. But I don't think we, until last year, unfortunately, didn't really realize how vital a component it is. Now, I guess never waste a crisis is the tagline or the theme of the year. But if there's a takeaway that we wouldn't want to give back, I think it's the fact that we have a genuine appreciation for what those features mean. And I think there's a commitment to them. The sense that makes then for our conversation is that managers struggle with well-being more than the teams they lead, Jim. And so when we think about managers, again, we go back to that key measurement. If they create the conditions for 70% of the circumstances that promote engagement, it's really hard for them to create those things when they're not experiencing them, saying those features themselves very positively, profoundly, and directly. I always say, like my little wordplay there, it's hard to create it if you're not consuming it, so to speak. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that last week a little bit in the challenges aspect of it. We have two really great resources that have become available 2 years ago. It's the Manager, I think late 2019, and we've really been spending a lot of time on It's the Manager. That's kind of, I think, for this topic, it's kind of it's the textbook. If you're not working from that 52 chapters of advice for managers to help them get through this, and organizations, to be honest, there's a whole section on setting up a strengths-based culture. Mike, I've said the three terms of a culture being strengths-based, engagement focused, and then I'm saying well-being oriented, in the sense of like, of truly understanding it. We have a new well-being book that just launched last week that I think again will be that Dr. Jim Harder says as a follow-up to, or a companion guide to, It's the Manager from an organizational standpoint. So, and Mike, anything else that, as we talked about resources that we're bringing in, what else should folks know about as they think about this conversation today?
No, I think it's those two features specifically. If you were so intrigued by the conversation broadly about well-being, there is an article out on Gallup.com, Jim, that's kind of signature to this discussion. It's the well-being engagement paradox of 2020, and it talks about for the first time ever we've seen this separation of predictability of relationship between engagement and well-being, which used to be highly correlated. And for the first time in history, we'll see if this continues to play itself out. But for the first time in history, in our measurement anyway, we've seen those two actually, with engagement increasing and staying steady, well-being declining. And so they're having a divergent now relationship. So that's got a lot of people, reconsidering. Maybe, I think the message there, I talked about this earlier, but I think just as we accelerate this, let's not take our foot off the gas. I think maybe presenting wise, we all have started to present or portray ourselves being a little more composed and put together than we actually are. And all these, every organization is thinking about return to work strategies. We're at a crossroads of school year concluding, summer coming up, shots, immunization, just a variety of dynamics and conditions that are still continuing to swirl around. So anyway, I the point with so mathematically, Jim, to your point, and then I'll move off the well-being conversation, is March, we asked a question. My organization cares about my overall well-being. 48% of the United States, nationally representative sample, 48% could strongly agree at that point in March. Then we see a slight uptick in May. We ask the exact same question, moves up 4%. That's our spike. 52% strongly agree. So you see there's a little rally all of a sudden.
This is 2020, May 2020.
Yep, 2020, 100%. And then the big attention getter, though, and this is where I kind of, validate my hypothesis, so to speak, but it declined. We asked that same question as recently as December of 2020, and it declined back to 39% strongly agree. So I just want to put out a caution flag. I'd love to be wrong. I hope I am, or if it's a different reason, but I just wonder if we're organizationally or leadership wise taking our foot off the gas a little prematurely. So,
yeah, I agree. And it's easy to, things begin to change a little bit. The environments begin to change. There begins to be hope. And then all of a sudden we step back, take a deep breath, but forget that we still have a lot of work to do. And I think this is the job of the manager, right? This is the job of the leadership teams. I've been particularly hard during this series on the manager of managers, as we talk about this, because it's really their role to keep this going inside organizations. And so I think it's really, really important, Mike, that we get to this today. We're kind of focusing on the perks. So we were pretty negative last week, and I think rightly so. Like there are big challenges, and not negative and hard on the managers, but just really understanding how hard that job really is and how really important that job is. Managers, good or bad managers, make or break organizations in their engagement and in their productivity. We know engagement is tied to productivity, tied to the bottom line, right? I mean, so at the end of the day, it does become dollars and cents. But there are some perks in this, Mike. I mean, as we think about the manager's role in it, let's start working on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at where things work in favor of the manager. So starting off, as we walk through, Jim, I love the outline, the empirical the emotional, and the experiential. I hope that helps us all organize our thoughts, and I'll really make sure we bucket the reference points there so that we can organize the output of the conversation and put it into motion literally the second we hang up. So starting off with the empirical, I always like leading off with, again, kind of this traditional 4 data point outline. The 4 key numbers, Jim, that we're going to work out today are 34%, 23%, 26%, and then 41%. And those all, when I reference those all are percentages that represent strongly agree. Okay, so we like to really polarize towards the extreme. That 5-point scale, that 5 matters a lot when we see the numbers shift and move. Those are going to be representative of numbers that really show us where our managers, distinct from the teams they're leading, thrive. Where are they having a natural percentage-wise decided advantage? Now, the one thing I want to set us up with preceding this, and this is why, our world just continues to just orchestrate around. If it was a listen for game, the number of times we talk about manager, I'm sure is it's a lot, but I don't know if we could say it's too much, to be honest. And the one number I think kind of level sets this, and why we continue to emphasize it so much, is when managers are categorically engaged, Jim, the teams they lead are 59% more likely to be engaged themselves. So we're talking about modeling, osmosis, all of those formal and informal interactions, things that just continually, in that pull strip kind of methodology put out a culture of engagement. Everything, every action, every word, all of those things are always on display, and they're intentionally or indirectly creating engagement. And so this is why we put so much emphasis, not just on the deficit, but now what are the opportunities? And if we help, and this is perfect for the audience, perfect from the strengths philosophy, let's take advantage of these areas where they have an edge, and let's get our arms around them and pull them towards, again, directly or indirectly promoting the best for their teams. So let's walk out these numbers. The 34% strongly agree. And there's a little bit of a theme over here, but we see this with senior leaders. We see it with managers. They really have an advantage in those roles, and where we see managers showing up stronger than the teams they lead, of being upstream in the decision-making process. So when they get a forecast, they get to be part of decisions and having some opinion that weighs in, and being able to inform the direction and the reception of those decisions. Really, really powerful spot where managers have a separate and distinct experience. The 34% is the percentage of managers who strongly agree that they have the authority that they need to do their jobs effectively. So when we think about, I think the theme that's important for us as coaches, right, is we think about when we coach well, we create authentic ownership of someone's role, right? We're putting solutions and constantly creating that space where they can own those solutions, they can inform decisions, but be somewhat entrepreneurial, and rightfully, as with evidence, they support autonomous in their own job in a way that doesn't get too restrictive. But managers really have a separate and distinct experience around the bandwidth. They're having the authority they need to do their job effectively. The second number, then, this notion of 23%, is the percentage of managers who strongly agree. And I think the language matters here, because I think if we look at the percentage, 23%, I don't know if that stands and says, wow. Because it certainly doesn't see, it's not majority, but it's about 25%, obviously, of the population. But I think we can appreciate it more when we think about what the item is represented by here. That's the item the question we ask here is, I can take risks at work that would lead to important new products, services, or solutions. Okay, so risks. So when you think about that, right, when you think about where are we most strong, most secure, most risk tolerant, not reckless, but risk tolerant, in a way that we can continuously be thinking about improvements, maybe even inventions, right, that transform the way we do work and the products that we put forward to external stakeholders, clients, customers. About a quarter of the managers out there can strongly agree that they have that type of bandwidth. So thematically, Jim, if we were to wrap those two numbers together, managers have an advantage in the fact that they just have a greater say in their experience, and it's upstream, right, so that they have a little less, what would we say, maybe disruption or whiplash from reacting to things, and have a chance to maybe brace themselves, if not really shape and carve out what that decision is going to look like. So we can think about that, and I think the advantage then is if managers have that. I think the key question, and I know you all coach this, but it can be an accountability point where managers probably need to be mindful that they're bringing their teams along with them. And sometimes it can be really easy. And I think as humans, it's easy for us. We get into this notion of projection, but for managers, if they're having that strong of an experience, the immediate reaction from them should be, how do I connect my team with this as effectively and quickly as possible? Otherwise, they'll get long ways down the road very, very quickly and look around and there's nobody else with them at all, right? Because they haven't continued to stair step that on through to their team through the right questions, their own coaching, their own buy-in, and bringing them along with them. They can easily make assumptions that they don't even know they're making. So, yeah, I'll
Mike,
stop there, Jim.
No, I think it's a good, good timing. We just spent some time with Matt Mosser on Tuesday talking about communication and really the cascading concepts of communication. How does it cascade down? What's the chronology of communication? How are managers held accountable for the communication that needs to make its way down? If it's a perk that they're involved in the decision-making process, I think like what I hear you saying is then the value is in bringing those that they manage along in that decision-making process, also making them feel like they're a part of that they get to have some say in it, right? That's kind of the whole purpose of the Q12, right? Is that they have a voice. They also have a voice in it. And it's being channeled up through I hate to use this word, but through chain of command or through the leadership that exists in the organization, however that's structured. At Gallup, we have a very thin layer there. It's a very flat infrastructure, so it doesn't take long for the communication to get there. Not all organizations can work that way. So we just recorded that. It's still in the live channel, but Jacqueline Robinson and I have been doing a series on teamwork. We talked a little bit about purpose, and the next one was on communication, just recorded this week. So I think timely that you bring that in as being one of those perks, but it can't be kept to themselves, right? They've got to be able to move that downstream, across stream, upstream, however you want to say it, right? From that perspective.
Yeah, that would be my request for this audience, Jim, is honestly, if we know this about managers, how do we convert that advantage to the outcome, to the engagement in a really effective way to benefit their team? And I think you're exactly right in that. I'm going to make an assumption, Jim, that when you had your conversation with Matt Mosser, I think it's one of the saddest, sorriest data points that we have out there. But right now, when we look at leadership, only 13% of the United States workforce says that the leadership of their organization communicates effectively to the rest of the organization. Only 13%. And I think you connected the dots right there, Jim. And I talked a little bit about this in our first call. I want to unpack it a little bit more because I think it is the drawbridge to this where we can really make this all work is I think leaders need to use that natural resource of what managers represent in that communication chain, I think that you described, to effectively create localized conversations. And I think if we are intentional about that communication network, feedback, coaching, all those conversations become powerful vehicles where we can have maybe some strong, tough but necessary decisions being disseminated in a way where we still keep our teams intact. They're in a locus of control. They have a sphere of influence. All of those things remain, but we have to do it on purpose. I use the reference point. We talked about it a little bit. I want to unpack them with a lot more detail because I think this is really important. Organizations and their leaders have to really pause and examine how effectively can our most local leaders endorse these tough and necessary decisions. We don't have the luxury or the opportunity every time to build consensus. So coaching those leaders, sitting with them, having a group conversation. Any manager who reports to a leader should have the chance to be coached through the why behind this conversation. How does it align with philosophy? How does it predict a better future? How does it stabilize us during the temporary sets of circumstances? And what you want to hear back, right, is don't yield to the temptation to push that out. And I think we're challenging ourselves to start to look at the difference between information and communication. And in information, Jim, you and I can shove content at each other's face all day long and feel like we're being productive and actually push each other further away in the process. Communication, we would contend, is where we create an effect on the receiving end. And so I think as we transmit this, thinking about, okay, we're going to put out a conversation. Maybe it's a newsletter, town hall, organization email. Can we say the way it's written, the way it's intended and aimed, will it change anyone's behavior on the receiving end? Will it change their engagement? Will it change their decision making? Are we surrogating the leadership of the local manager, which we shouldn't do? So at the very least, put out those broad messages. They're necessary and they do help you unify us, but at least have the expectation that it's necessary to have a parallel local conversation. How do those broad messages set a local manager and team up to have a very powerful and effective engagement driven conversation around what will this look like for us? And then Jim, I'll just spend this more time. So that's the endorse aspect of it. Advocacy. So then let's not just leave it as an arrow pointing it down and through the manager. Let's bring it back full circle to the leadership. So Jim, when you and I meet with our teams and we talk about a conversation or a policy or something that's shifting about Gallup, the invitation then for us to advocate on behalf of our teams, hey, you know what? We thought this was going to go well, and you know what? It did. And here were the parts that really landed, or in all raw transparency, you know what? Our timing was off, Jim. The language was a little bit tone deaf, or maybe the decision itself could have used a little more refinement, whatever those things are. But those are really tough courage moments. And I think that centerpiece of the manager is just paramount in the capacity to either cause it to be a wild success. Because Jim, I can deliver the exact same message and wildly engage you in my delivery, my buy-in, we're going back to the 59% lift, or I can just, essentially, hey, Jim, here's the piece of paper I'm supposed to deliver. I'm just a messenger. And you can tell like this guy has no belief in this, no buy-in, and I'm actually more disengaged now and probably a little bit more fearful and anxious and apprehensive about the future of our organization, whether I should be or not. So
during that conversation with Matt on Tuesday, we talked a little bit about the individualization component of communication, especially for managers, and understanding, Mike, you may even deliver that same bit of information to the same way to two different people and may be received differently, and understanding how that communication needs to happen. If managers are not having regular communication with those that they manage, I mean, it all boils down to the five coaching conversations for managers, right? If they don't know how to bring and deliver that, this perk of being involved in decision-making process is quickly wasted.
Yeah.
Because they're not able to communicate it to those who need to hear it. And that may need to be different. Something, we'll have a team meeting and I'm just going to say it. Well, okay, that may still not be the most effective way to get it done, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's another data point, but I think it really, not so much for the recreational pursuit of collecting data points, but for what they mean to the exact point that you made, Jim. It wasn't a centerpiece that we're talking about, but it gets my attention every time. We asked a very simple question a few years ago to the United States workforce, and the question was, does your manager have regular meetings with you? Couldn't be more simple and straightforward, right? And then it was just a yes, no. Not on a 1 to 5 scale, just a yes, no. And on that item alone, the population that said, yes, my manager has regular meetings with me, 40% of the population were categorically engaged. And 9% of that population who said yes were actively disengaged. And we all know, right? If I'm engaged, I'm all in. I withhold nothing. If I'm actively disengaged, I'm passively aggressively withholding effort and information that I by choice know would benefit my team or my organization. So a pronounced shift between those two mindsets. The population that said no was only 25% categorically engaged, but the attention really showed up in the actively disengaged. 30% of that population are actively disengaged. So it goes back to your point, Jim, and here's where the frequency of those conversations pushes back on fear, anxiety, and apprehension about where we're at, why, and what's next relative to confidence, strength, security, right? That we're calibrated, we're connected, we're confident because we haven't had so much gap between, left to wonder, where we're going and maybe why. We just close those gaps, and those are meaningful, right? We're talking about we're back to the emotional portion of our conversation. It changes who we are and our confidence to get there on the other side.
Mike, can coaches have conversations with their managers along these lines of saying, how do you feel it's going? Tell me a little bit about your team and how you're communicating with them. Is that an area that can be coached as we think about that channel of communication or the way they work with their teams?
Well, it can be. And I think that's, again, what I appreciate about this group and just a chance to have this conversation is when we hold. So first off, right, we're thinking about ownership. So I think it's a good, for me, and I think as we coach, I think it's helping those leaders think about and collect evidence that they actually are having the right conversations at the right time with the right person for the right outcome, but with the center of this all being ownership. And for them to come back, and we get into that notion of storytelling, but I love, as I coach leaders, having them tell me a story about a conversation or a coaching interaction you had where with evidence, qualitatively or quantitatively, that you actually created ownership. You had an interaction with somebody on your team on purpose, and they produced or performed better, not just productively, but personally showed growth as a result of that conversation. And those stories, I go back to our friend Ed O'Boyle, who just, I plagiarize him all the time on that statement. Stories propagate our culture. And I think there's a lot of best practices. We study success. It's wildly strengths philosophy based. But I think it also helps the manager internalize around 3 points. And I challenge them on this. I want managers to think about, am I effectively creating those stories because of my coaching? Like, is Jim generating more performance-oriented stories that are meaningful to him as a result of my coaching? So creating those stories is important. That's one aspect of it. The second piece, though, Jim, is if I'm coaching well, I should be capturing those stories. So the follow-up, Jim, should be in the framework of feedback. Hey, Jim, guess what? We had that conversation. We set a goal. You did it, or you're profoundly moving towards it. And there's a lot of success to celebrate there. So we have to have eyes wide open, capturing those stories as they occur right before our very eyes. The third piece then is communicating those stories out and making them the worst kept secret we possibly can. So we create, capture, and communicate. I think we could mass produce the most powerful stories that move our entire culture forward and reveal so much about what true performance is, on purpose and with the partnership and support of very meaningful peers and leaders in our own lives. So it's a simple framework, but it's one that helps organize. Sometimes we can talk about stories and it feels like, a little loose, a little vague and wandering, but this simple framework, I think, snaps together well.
What stops that in organizations, Mike? Do you think? I mean, what while you're thinking about that, I oftentimes think there's risk and fear associated with that. In other words, I'm going to share a story. In some work cultures, it's like the whack-a-mole. If you stand up too tall, they whack you back down, right?
Yeah.
And so you're afraid of maybe making too big of a deal of someone in that, or over promoting someone. What else gets in? What else just kind of quickly here? What else short circuits that in organizations that you've seen?
Well, you know what? It's funny because we're I laugh at myself. I just laugh at I think we all get a good joke at human beings in general, right? I think we have these fabulous flaws that make us wildly entertaining and endearing. But I will give us credit. I actually do think, to a large degree, I think we're all fairly. And maybe some of it's fear-based, but I do think there is some humility. I think we all like to be in sync with our peers and be authentic. And I think sometimes there's a reservation, Jim. And again, I keep sharing my appreciation for this audience and just the repositioning of strengths alone. But I say this all the time, and I help clients understand. Not as a cliche, but if we know, just as a point of reference, Jim, the odds of you and I having the same top 5 in the same order as everyone in this group knows is 1 in 33 million. Not just recreational data, but there is something there, right? That, Jim, if you authentically don't do that thing, your contribution is essentially irreplaceable, mathematically irreplaceable. For me, my contribution is mathematically irreplaceable, but I think sometimes we see it as self-preferential, self-oriented, and I think we just we reserve that because maybe out of humility we just don't want to come across as egotistical or as showboating or grandstanding, etc. But I think what we can do, and this again, what I love about this group, I love the authentic, continuous positioning that, Jim, everybody mathematically is great, performance-wise should be great, and we have to connect those two features. But the way we do that is, I think, repositioning it. We are not talking about ego. We are simply talking about the best high-level expectation we can to make our maximum contribution. Again, with the accountability that if you don't, we're going to graphically miss a key part of what our success could look like. And I think the repositioning of that, this is what I love about the focus on performance, is it takes the preference out of the way, right? Because if it wasn't about performance, then it would be easy for it to be just about me. Am I getting a bigger share of the stage? Is the spotlight even brighter? And are there less people around me? So it's just all about me. But when we're talking about performance, you do see this natural alignment where now it's like, it's this collective pooling of resources. And we still get to grow and develop as we see that output really generated. But those are a couple of features that I think really keep. But I do think that notion of, I think people are to a large degree just like, I don't want to seem like I'm coming across like a big deal. I want to be in sync with the rest of my group. And so they hold back a little bit. And I think we can push that forward as long as there's evidence around it that brings the team along.
I think a great example for my own role is in 2020, my goal was to communicate as much as possible. So the measurement was, how many of these things do we make? Like, it was literally that simple. What are we doing? How many? And the goal was just to keep talking, right? And so, we did 80 some of these call to coaches in 2020. That was a 50% increase from the year before, right? This year, the focus with my manager, Matt, if you want to, he's on that Tuesday session, is quality. What do we know now? Like, what kind of feedback are we getting on these? What kind of numbers are we getting on them? We want to do less, but we want to make them better. And so that's a doing that. I'm doing the exact same thing. Just the focus is different. And so I'm starting to think through, how are we measuring those quality numbers? How do we know we're doing? It's easy to measure less. How do we know that less is more from a quality standpoint? So we have these quality conversations around them where much of an emphasis on tracking the number of downloads, number of views, whatever, all that stuff is measurable. So we get to have that conversation. I get to have that conversation with my manager that then engages me from the standpoint of being very, very clear on what we're looking for. So, okay, we're going to run out of time if we don't keep going, Mike. So keep us on track here. What else?
Yeah, we'll do. And the chat's got fascinating conversation moving forward in that as well. So I love the content going on there. Yeah. So Jim, the other two numbers that I wanted to call out specifically, pay is the other feature. So we talked about span of influence, right? And the decision making that managers have up front. Pay, which might rival what, I don't know, is there a least favorite subject that we could probably get our arms around other than just pay and what it represents? But managers actually, and we're not talking about they feel good about the fact that they might think that they're paid more than the teams they lead. What we're really talking about, and this is, I think, is a really central feature for us when we think about the emotion around pay. Managers, that 26% data point that I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, 26% of managers strongly agree, and again, I think we all as coaches will hear the language very loudly here, strongly agree that my pay and incentives motivate me to do what is best for our overall organization. And so when you think about that, honestly, pay is just a vehicle. It's honestly a vehicle that if it's used effectively, it connects philosophy, mission, values. But when we think again about the central feature of ownership and influence, does our pay operationalize the vision, the purpose, the philosophies, our organization to you, Jim, to me, to any one of us in a way where we feel like we can live those out authentically with the right priorities of what we're actually paid for, and they're within our span of influence. And I think there's a far bigger picture than just, Jim, do you get paid $50 more this year than you did last year? And sometimes we get too transactional, I think, around and our measurement shows up over and over again that the experience around pay is infinitely more powerful and effective than the actual currency itself, so to speak. So a lot there for us. And again, managers, right? And this is where, if that advantage for managers is strong, and if we can invest in it even more, and always making sure that pay and philosophy are wrapped and bound tightly together, think about how then that shapes and shifts how they can affect their teams positively for that. I will tell you, when we go back to our conversation around financial or about well-being, Jim, the scariest, when we talk about just fear, raw red line fear, the scariest feature of any of our constructs around well-being, we call it a component, but the component of future financial well-being scares everyone to death. Like it is like it's so scary. We just want to like, it's the head in the sand, close our eyes, hum loudly to ourselves so that we could just never, ever think about it, which inevitably, right, creates the very problem we're trying to avoid. But if you think about how vital it is and how much personification of purpose, well-being, all of those values coming to life through the advantage of the manager, it shouldn't be scary, right? And if we can, how can we set up managers? The philosophy actually stabilizes our confidence and security about having a high impact conversation around what does our future financial well-being look like and what can we do today to cause that to be the best that it possibly can.
What's the conversation for managers individually around pay? I mean, when do we have any numbers, or do we know kind of how it affects? Because we talk a lot about the manager having an influence or an effect on their team's performance. What about their own individual performance?
You mean the manager's own individual performance or an individual's performance on their team?
A manager's their own individual performance, how they're measured, what they're doing, and their own personal pay. Because we often find that's difficult. I mean, yes, it's difficult to manage the pay of others. What about my own pay? How does that happen? What do we know about that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. So let me take that. That's a great segue into our next data point, Jim.
Yeah,
Whether you
yeah.
did that on purpose or not, your instincts are uncanny.
Maybe a little.
I don't know about that. But let's talk about that. We did talk about the effect on the organizational level. When we get down locally to the individual, the 41%, which as we know is the highest number of the data points we shared. So 41% of managers strongly agree that their pay and incentives motivate them to achieve individually. So we're getting, that's a strong number. That five, I just want to keep emphasizing. I know sometimes we're like only 41%, only 26%. We really have to earn our way to that 5. So if it's a 41% figure, that does give us, again, I think an area of opportunity, a strength that we should build on. But you can see at that individual level, that local influence, that span of control. Jim, I'm going to go back, and this, you called it out. But I think as much of our conversation, I would hope, does two things. One is it helps managers know that if these constructs are true and if they're representative, if these are 4 data points that represent part of my experience as a manager, Jim, your experience as a manager, I think it allows the manager to own and activate in a very productive, positive way conversations that would extend the 5 or get our experience closer to a 5 as they lead up, as they manage up to the people they report to, right? And be able to say, hey, I know these features are important. Here's how I think it could be better for myself. And it's a very high level, positive conversation that's not delivered as complaining or whining or deficit in its orientation. So that I think is important, but we ideally we wouldn't have to wait for the manager to activate on that. I would hope these data points and constructs really equip leaders of managers to connect down and to make sure that the investment in an area of strength, in an area of separate advantage for leaders relative, or for managers relative to the teams they lead, is really augmented, knowing the chain reaction that it extends and connects to throughout the entire organization.
One of the things I think we do really well at Gallup is, and I'm not saying every manager, but many managers have a kind of a side gig as far as maybe an individual. They're still contributing individually in some way as well as managing their teams in ways that I think allows them to have that individual outlet. So how can we best use them? How can we take what they're really good at? This is why I'm doing what I do now here on webcasting, right? And continue to grow that out. And I've just seen, Mike, that doesn't show up in a lot of books or in a lot of in a lot of the data, but I've watched some amazing individual contributions from managers doing things, still feeding that engagement beast, so to speak, so that they can have an area where they're particularly good at and win, and not only win for themselves, but win for their organization and continue to drive that high engagement. And so it's been, again, it's we don't talk about that. It doesn't show up in our books, but that is something I've noticed inside our organization that I haven't seen happen in other orgs, where they get an opportunity to succeed. Moving forward, we spend a lot of time since it's the manager talking about this idea of managers moving from boss to coach. You spent a lot of time, we have we have a course around that for individuals and organizations. Talk a little bit about what does that really mean? Just for folks who maybe are coming to this and thinking like, what does it mean to move from more of a, from a boss to coach?
Yeah. It's one way to think about it, Jim, is it's like full range leadership is a way to think about it. So we're not necessarily, I love the authenticity of it. It's knowing that in that role, it's different than a lot of coaches, in the community here. But when we think about managers and teams, the coaching, we're still trying to create an effective performance, but it's in a different arena, so to speak. And we're pretty upfront about the fact that sometimes, given the circumstances, Jim, you and I may have to involve ourselves as a boss. Those situations might be necessary and direct. And I always say, to use the metaphor, Jim, if you're teaching me how to fly a plane, and you're sitting next to me and I'm on that inaugural run, right? And I'm sitting there involved in chit chat with you, and I'm not paying attention, and we're literally flying into the side of a mountain. You should not coach me at that point in time. You should be the world's most amazing boss, yell, yank the steering wheel, whatever we need to do, clear the mountain, and then as quickly as you possibly can, get back to coaching me. Now, Mike, let's review this near miss, right? Let's reflect, what could we have done better, ... So it's okay to be a boss, but our span of effect and influence really shows up in coaching. And maybe, Jim, futuristically and proactively, better coaching from you might have avoided that situation from ever occurring in the first place. But we give the full range, right, of predominantly what does it really look like to be a coach in the arena of leading a team. And there's some specific features that really do connect the dots up to where managers thrive, and to how do they involve themselves most effectively in the transference of the noun of being a coach and the verb of coaching. And those three features, like, as we bring those to life, three things that I would have us think about. One is, when you think about the employee experience, onboarding, development, even to retirement and exit, how much can managerial coaching explain a thriving and fulfilling experience across each of those three features, regardless of how long or short each of those three touch points is? I'll throw out a couple data points that I think we can do so much better at with the managerial advantages that we put on display. Only 12% of organizations or people inside organizations in the US would say that their company does a great job of onboarding. It's a miserable figure. And I want to make sure we unpack that figure, Jim, because it's important. We asked that question, nationally representative sample. We didn't ask it just to the new people who were in their first 6 months or first year. We asked it, Jim, to you, to me, people who have been with Gallup or other organizations for decades, or 5 years or more. And we're looking back, answering that question and holding it up to the light and saying, I wish I knew then what I know now. I could have been far more accelerated, right? So there's an opportunity there when we think about the managerial influence in that onboarding piece. Also, we know the number one reason that people are actually dissatisfied, maybe tempted to leave their organizations, is the lack of developmental opportunities inside the organization. And when we think about those 5 conversations, I've contended many times that the hardest one for managers to lead is the developmental coaching conversation, because it's not held accountable to a project or a client or a deadline. It's literally us carving out with intentionality the space to grow the people on our team with stretch assignments and developmental positioning. But yet, we know this tagline of people don't leave organizations, they leave managers, but what they're leaving that the manager is lacking is the activation around that developmental opportunity. The third piece then that I would have us call out, is that people, and this is, the conviction around this is tough, but 52% of people who leave their organization say that their organization or manager could have done something to prevent them from leaving, which is ghastly when you think about, that talent drain. And yet the people leaving say that something could have been done, but wasn't. So those 3 touch points, entry, development, career development, on through to exit, we really need to aim our managers directly at those specific pieces. So that's really, the course is a broad structure around that, but it's understanding what's either present as an advantage or absent if we don't, and really calling into accountability managers' capacity to coach using the tools and resources of strengths as a philosophy, engagement as a framework, performance as an expectation, to really connect the dots between all three and involve themselves very appropriately.
I loved when I was managing the interns, and they would come in. We get them for 12 weeks in the summer, and I know another instrument that has 12 questions in it. And so we had a question every week. We'd speed those up towards the end because it didn't make sense to be covering Q12 on the last week, but the last question. But Mike, it was for me, it was an experience that I made sure as their manager, I wanted to walk through the expectations of each one of those. And it kept me accountable to make sure I was covering all those topics with them, not telling them how they should give, how they should answer it or what they should answer. But the premise behind it, this is why this early series that we did around these 12 questions and kind of what they mean for coaches was so important. I was actually doing that during that series when we were putting that together, and and I think it set the tone for them through the course of the summer, or many of them we hired in later on. But it kind of set the tone from them from an organizational standpoint to say, hey, these are our values. These are this is how we see these things, and they could hear it from me as a manager. Here's how I see these things. Let's dialogue about this. And then also hear from them. Here's how they feel about this, and gave me the opportunity. I think sometimes in the onboarding cycle, and by the way, Danny Lee did an amazing job last year. We spent an hour with Danny Lee talking about onboarding. So go to Gallup.com, search onboarding, and look for Call to Coach with Danny Lee. It's a make or break in some cases. In other words, you just spent all this money hiring this person. If you're not helping organizations discover, develop, and deploy an onboarding program that's meaningful, that just flush it. That money is just like, so I think great opportunities there. I think as we think of managers being coaches, the great opportunity in the onboarding experience to really practice that, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting, and I know Danny brought this out, but I can't be struck. There's two ingredients that the world, I think, is starting to figure out. Our data would absolutely support this, that really shift and transform our onboarding efforts so that we can move well past 12% as companies doing a great job of onboarding their associates. And the two ingredients that we're seeing a lot of traction is, one, and you called it out, Jim, putting managers as far upstream into that process authentically and actively as much as they possibly can. It helps to normalize, it helps to accelerate, how a person connects to their team, to their expectations, making meaningful contributions much more quickly than they would if they just went through a traditional knowledge transfer experience, right? And so, Jim, actually what you did with your interns is perfect, because what we would say is extend that onboarding to a minimum of a year, right? We're way too collapsed in our expectation of what onboarding should look like, and to really establish those footings of confidence, we don't need to rush that, accelerate it. We just need to do it really well, and then add on to it once we have the confidence that it's perfectly established. But that's with a manager. We actually see that if a manager is effectively involved, it more than triples the likelihood for people to say that their onboarding experience was exceptional. So that piece is really powerful. And I think another important thing for this group to know, strengths upstream in that onboarding experience. I'm having a lot of clients who are winning awards, our Gallup Exceptional Workplace Award, our CliftonStrengths Award. They're doing a remarkable job of aiming strengths so that as people show up day one on training, I've got my full 34 reports sitting there ready and waiting for me, and it just transforms and accelerates everything about the onboarding experience. And just think, people leading the knowledge transfer know how to lead the courses more effectively because they're more in tune, right, with that strengths reception. I can own my performance and my success in whatever my expectations are in my onboarding, because you've given me now these 5 things that ensure success and output, 10 things that ensure success and output, changes the entire dynamic. But it's exciting to see that we can take such a miserable 12% figure and transform it with the emphasis on 2 predominant features. So,
Mike, my life changed when Tiffany took Theme Thursday and embedded that into our own onboarding process. You talk about, eating your own dog food or drinking your own champagne or making your own cupcakes kind of thing. She embedded that in. And so part of onboarding was going out and listening to your top 5 on Theme Thursday. And there were some pieces in that onboarding that held accountability for that. And that really changed the equation, even internally for us in a lot of ways. And for me in particular, because then every single employee saw what we were doing and saw the investment we were making ourselves in strengths. And it was a little creepy the first couple times. I'd have new folks recognize me in the lunchroom. I just thank you, kind of thing they would say.
Oh yeah.
But it does begin with that, right? And that was very early. Organizations can still do that. We have 6 seasons to choose from. You can begin to embed those and use them in a way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to make your own. If you want to, you can. But a great opportunity to embed those in your system as well. Mike, as we think about wrapping this up, final thoughts and kind of put a bow on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I was just to tie this all together, so one shout out that I wanted to say to you, and this is what I love about the commodity that you've honestly created through this community, the conversations that we're all seeing in the chat and having. And I know a lot of coaches are doing this, maybe all, but I just want to continue to endorse it. But I don't know if there's a more powerful, effective way for us as consultants, coaches to position the most effective content represented by the work that you put together, Jim. Again, the right message, the right audience, at the right time. These can be collapsed into sound bites, series, etc. But they bring organizations along in a way that I think really preserves the premium of who we all are as coaches and consultants, so that we're not so heavily involved, and again, in knowledge transfer and establishing a foundation, but preserving our time for real value add levels of involvement where genuinely necessary. So just wanted to put that out there, that you've accelerated that foundation and put it really intact in a way that's almost, you created the good news, bad news situation, where the good news is you have everything. The bad news is we have to figure out what's the right point of content at the right time. But that's where our expertise comes in. So I love the scenario there. 3 touch points, Jim, if I was to bring this all in for a landing.
Yeah.
Think about the advantages that we talked about that managers have. And don't miss the mark. Aim those advantages specifically at performance issues or challenges that your clients are having culturally, through onboarding, development, exit, etc. Just think about the aim of those advantages that managers have towards an issue that the organizations are having that you're working with. The second is real life scenarios. Your coaching is a vital part of development for managers. And so when you think about the context of these data points, or the context of where managers naturally struggle, where managers naturally thrive, I think that really helps to put some right angles, some 90-degree angles, to help managers step in with a level of confidence and clarity and see where they can, with intentionality, involve themselves either out of opportunity or out of advantage. The last piece then is, I think, when we really start to coach and help organizations reconsider what does managerial success look like moving forward, where do individual contributors authentically become managers, where do managers authentically become leaders of teams of managers, this notion of engagement, right? If leaders and managers can demonstrate their effective leadership through engagement increases, that's as strong an evidence as we would say that they can build and lead through others, which is a non-compromise, right? And it's where you start to see separation of player coach to a manager of a team without actually then being a player on into leaders who maybe actually never touch the product at all, but can organize a division, a department, a unit to actually deliver on that outcome successfully, just by being a phenomenal team leader and organizer of talent.
Next week, we're going to talk about managers of managers. Tease that for just a little bit. Why should they come and listen next week?
Yeah, well, so here's the gap, right? Is we have this book called "It's the Manager," and the whole world is paying rightful attention to that pressure point, but we want to make sure we don't overcorrect, right? And oh, by the way, it is about the manager, but guess what? The managers need? They need phenomenal leaders, and leaders, quite frankly, have a very parallel level of acknowledgement, coaching, interaction. It's somewhat unique and different, but very consistent with what we're asking managers to do. And guess what? Leaders need to be developed. They need to be developing managers into better leaders. And so how do we start to uniquely take a look at leadership interactions to bring out higher level of leadership on their own part, better managerial effect for the managers to report to them, and align that with organizational structure and outcome? So we just want to make sure we aren't leaving leaders behind as if this reference point of manager was too tightly, I guess, defined and restricted.
I'm excited for that as we lead up to the new manager report that is coming out. This is kind of all coming to a conclusion and in a symphony of communication that we've done. Jacqueline and I have been working on this idea of teamwork. You and I have been spending some time looking at the manager with this new manager report, plus the summit is coming up. So a lot of things happening. So Mike, thanks for taking some time today to talk about this and to be a part of that conversation. With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we do have available now in Gallup Access. Go to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, sign in there. And if you haven't checked out the resources tab, go to the upper left menu, drop it down and choose resources and just start searching. Listen, there's a library of stuff available for you there, regardless of whether you're a subscriber, full subscriber or not, that you can get access to a lot of the stuff we're talking about. And don't forget all the resources Mike had mentioned is on gallup.com. So get out there, get it in. And whenever somebody says they don't have enough information, I'm like, you're not trying hard enough. We have tons of stuff out there that's available for you. For coaching, master coaching, or if you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. There's actually some great coaching deals that are going on during the summit. So if you want to purchase coaching for yourself, coaches need coaching. If you want to have one of our master coaches spend some time with you, now it's the time to purchase it. I think it's 15% off if you attend the summit. So get in there, GallupAtWork.com, scroll all the way to the bottom. You see those offerings that are available there as well. Thousands coming to that. It's June 8th and 9th, by the way. Love to have you register. Love to have you a part of it. Jump in there and get that done. If it's after the fact, if you're listening to this, maybe September, October, November of 2021 or any other year, we probably have another summit going on. So make sure you check out GallupAtWork.com. And we'll have that available for you. You can find us on any social platform just by searching Clifton Strengths. And if you found this helpful, we'd really love it. It'd make our day. Our engagement would go way up if you just share it. Just get that out there, grab the link, share it with those that are in your mastermind groups. Share it with those maybe that you coach. Take parts out of it. Send them links, the YouTube links to specific parts that you want them to listen to. Lots of great opportunities to share it. I know that helps me. So thanks for doing that as well. We'll see you next time. Actually, I think tomorrow, I think we got one more of these to do with you. We have a coach coming on, talk a little bit about confrontation. So it's going to be kind of fun to do that as well. We'll see you tomorrow. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.